Hey guys, hi. This is Sumeet from Incentivate, presenting you once again Incentivate Talks. The purpose we are here today is to have a word with Chris and Ali, good friend of mine. I've had the honor of meeting Chris for over a year. I've met him several times. Ali, I happened to meet him recently at the Salescom conference in San Francisco. And that is where we kind of thought of coming up with this podcast for a very specific topic. So, why are we here today? Ali represents talent acquisition. Chris represents sales compensation. He's a design expert on the sales comp design side. The purpose of this conversation is to identify: is there a way that talent acquisition and sales comp functions should collaborate at all? With that, I want to jump into the details, but before I go there, I would want Ali and Chris, in this order, to quickly introduce yourselves. And once you're done, we can jump into the details. Ali, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sumeet, and thanks for having us today. My name's Ali Ghiassi. I lead talent acquisition with a company called Fortria. So we're a global clinical research organization, and I have the opportunity to support all of our what we call corporate functions. So sales, marketing, contracts and proposals organization, as well as finance, IT, HR, legal, procurement. Probably forgetting something, but we've got a great team here that leads essentially identifying top talent for our company across the globe.
Brilliant. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And very happy to be able to have an opportunity to talk with Buddy Ali and be here for the audience. So I have about 18 years in sales comp experience. I'm currently with LabCorp and been there a little over 5 years now, managing sales compensation. And I also speak and write on the topic of sales comp. Many of my musings, if you will, sort of reside at salescompguy.com.
Got it. Great. Thanks, guys. So to start with the topic that we are here for, how to attract and engage sales teams. Uh, when we have talent acquisition and sales come together, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a pretty brilliant conversation over the next half an hour. So to start with, I've got few stats with me handy right now. I'm going to throw them to you guys, and then we will jump deeper into the conversation. I would want to know more about your thoughts about the stats that I'm going to bring up, and your take on how both the functions need to align slash collaborate for better sales performance. So as I see on my notes, nearly 50% of employees leave their job because of a mismatch between their expectations based on the recruitment process versus what they see in reality. As per CNBC, disengaged employees cost the world $7.8 trillion loss of productivity, which is 11% of global GDP. Now I know that we can't do anything here in our own capacity, but what it means is that these problems are actually stemming from our organizations too. We are facing the same things. Again, CNBC says that roughly 50% of workers report or have reported that they are feeling stressed at their job on a daily basis, which is pretty weird because when we look at 2020 and later, as organizations, we have been more liberal. We have opened up work remote, people working from anywhere. Now, despite that, almost 50% of employees are saying that they are feeling burnt out. And when I look at sales, 60% of salespeople meet their targets. And on an average, it takes roughly for talent acquisition anywhere between 75,000 US dollars to 90,000 US dollars to replace a salesperson or hire a salesperson. That is crazy. I want to understand from Ali and Chris, given that you have been in the space for enough, I have been in the space of sales compensation for the last 17 years. I would want to know from you, what is your take on this? So Ali, if you could just quickly start by defining what you do in talent acquisition, which you have done already. But from talent acquisition standpoint, if you could just give your take, followed by Chris, your take on this, it would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Sumeet. So I'll try and, I guess, just from my perspective, address the three stats you just mentioned. The first one I didn't know, so that's a lot. That's a lot of money
Yeah, it's a
too
lot of money.
globally. My knee-jerk reaction listening to you though was, I do feel like that's the case. In terms of what I do, so me and my team, ultimately our goal is to understand the brief, right? So we've got an organization we're trying to build. We've got goals in front of us we're trying to hit. If we want to look and try and identify, right, a person to join the organization in X capacity, like what are the requirements for that role? What does somebody need to be successful in the job? What kind of experience is going to set them up for success? And then also, and what's most important, I think this has probably evolved over the past several years, is it the right fit for them?
Got it.
And nowadays, the biggest thing is you can't trick people. I mean, ultimately, there's so much out there when it comes to whether it's LinkedIn, Glassdoor, people's maybe, let's say, ability or comfortability in networking, to reach out to people in an organization and ask them, what's a day in the life like? What do you enjoy about the company, et cetera? And then there's all these resources too that arm candidates, and rightly so, with the questions that they should ask in an interview process. So, that transparency is already there. And I think it's our responsibility in talent acquisition to make sure that that is absolutely there. What are you getting into? What's the opportunity? What would you be required to do? What are we hoping to accomplish as a company so we can share that with people? Because at the end of the day, if that doesn't align with somebody's goals and motivations, they're not going to be set up for success, not necessarily because of the company or compensation plan, but just because, it's not something that they're excited about and they want to drive towards. And I think we all know that, work is work, but it doesn't always feel like work if it's something that you're passionate about and you enjoy. And also you feel like you have the ability to be very successful in it. So when you speak of the 50% of employees have left because of mismatch, based on expectations, I think that is, our responsibility is to ensure that those expectations are really clear as much as we can, right? I don't have a crystal ball. There's going to be things I'm going to be really transparent with a candidate to say, like, I don't know what's going to happen. Here's what we hope will happen. Here's probably the reason why we're, speaking to you so that you can come into the company and help us achieve this. If that's not going to be something that aligns with your goals and aspirations, then, it's going to be really hard for you to hit the ground running or even pick up, what you need to be successful and have fun doing it. So, when it comes to how do we present the opportunity, the company, the culture, what they're getting into, et cetera, like we've got to spend the time to know what that is so that we can articulate that really clearly and make it easy for somebody to know what they're getting into so that there isn't a mismatch. I mean, ultimately their ability to succeed is somewhat on them, right? Somewhat on market conditions, economic conditions. I mean, there's all kinds of factors. But them knowing that, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm up for the challenge. I'm excited about it. Like if you can give them that up front, I think that cuts out a lot of the noise and hopefully the opportunity for this to occur, right? In terms of it being a mismatch and costing the company a lot of money. I think the stressed part at work, that's a hard one. Because when I think of sales, I mean, I think that it is a stressful, what do you call it? Job, right? For lack of thinking of a better adjective. So I don't know if the stress would go away, but I think going back to the expectation and the comfortability and knowing what you're responsible for and what you can achieve and the fact that you've got, let's say, X support around you, I mean, should make you feel better about going to battle every day, if you will, as a salesperson. So that even though you're stressed because you really want to hit your goals and you're holding yourself accountable to that, you don't feel like you've got the world against you and the company against you as well. So I hate for that to be the case. And I think it does maybe just tie into my first comment, around how do we bring somebody on board and how do we share what this is going to look like for them before the fact. And then, the cost of replacing anybody in the organization, is expensive. So I think those numbers actually probably are the same for, SG&A roles, operational roles, et cetera. I mean, just, equipment, ramp up time, the human capital cost, right? Of somebody walking out the door who has the knowledge about the company, the client base, what we do, how we do it, understanding how to articulate our unique selling points. I mean, these things just take time and investment and training and, you really want somebody to come in and be set up for success, because if not, like, it's going to cost everybody quite a bit of money. And I don't
Thanks.
think there's a way to overcome that.
So on these points, actually, I have some supporting numbers, but I'm glad that we are aligned over here. Now, before I jump into those numbers, Chris, your take on this? You have been on the design side. You've been working closely with salespeople and even talent acquisition. So, what is your take on this? These numbers are humongous, right? This doesn't serve any purpose to any organization if these numbers are even kind of made more generic. And even if we kind of break them down at organization level by the sizes, this is still significant. So, from design side or someone who has been in the space working closely with salespeople, what do you feel about?
Yeah, I think that there is definitely times where organizations sort of end up with a bait and switch sort of situation. And I mean that from a perspective of we'll figure out the job after the person comes on board, and we run into that from time to time because we don't actually have clarity of what it is they want that they need to do to be successful. So we say, oh, well, I know so and so from a prior job, from prior company, who's really really good, and then like let's bring them over and we'll throw money at them, and then we'll figure out what we actually need. And what we may find out is what we need isn't what they're good at, and so they're set up for failure. I think generally speaking, people want to be part of something greater than themselves. They want to do good work, they want to be successful, so
Mm,
this is naturally connected to the motivation, the disengagement,
mm,
and that sort of like they've left their jobs because they don't see how they make money. That naturally connects also to the incentive design. So
mm,
the company says, "Oh, here's our strategy," but that's not what I know how to do, or not what I know how to succeed at. Because for most people, there's also like this sentiment of it's skills and motivation. And so,
mm,
when we come into performance, we have this issue of either a skill gap or a knowledge gap, right? You
mm,
might say talent, but and there's also the motivation, so the actions of both internal and external motivation, mind you, right?
mm,
For people to want to perform and want to be at their best, in being able to execute on what is asked of them in the job. Um, the other stat that you said, it was like 60% of people make quota. That's actually up from what I've seen.
got it.
Alexander Groups have been running at like 50% ish
Okay.
for like more than a decade. So maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we're actually getting better at setting quotas. I don't know, or we're just under expecting, if you will, right?
That
And
is,
we've learned to lower them. It's hard to say. Productivity makes a lot of sense to me because disengagement has been a problem, continues to be a problem. I think it's probably I would almost argue it's probably less so in for sales because of the variable component.
mm,
We definitely notice we get a trade off here, right? Just like the replacement cost for sales usually includes a certain amount of lost revenue. You know what I mean? Like that there's an expected cost of both a replacement of the person, but also a cost associated with a lack of like revenue coming in from the lack of focus, or
right.
like no bodies, right? Pursuing revenue. So it's a little bit of a different measure for sales, but it's no less impactful. It's definitely significant. And another stat I think worth calling out is that the actual attrition rate for sales is much higher than most jobs. And I
Yes.
think the earlier in a sales career, the more likely that is to be the case. More of your BDRs, your SDRs, your inside sales, where those folks are even, I would say, even worse from
Yes.
just being thrown into a job and said, "Oh, by the way, learn how to make 200 calls a day and figure out how to talk to people." Right, with no little to no training. So we
Mm.
we definitely see that from like a job structure perspective, and as well as incentive design.
So on this point, in fact, I've got like two, 3 points from what the two of you have said. Let me add my 2 cents to this. On the attrition side, Chris, I agree that the attrition on sales side is high. Now, what is that number? What I've read is the number is roughly 34% across sales as a holistic function. Within sales, Chris, as you said, that you've got uh, people who are actually front ending, you've got account executives, you've got PDRs, you've got SDRs. So the numbers are going to vary. But
Yep.
holistically, as a function, the attrition today stands at 34%. And what does that mean? For me, what I am kind of reading from this is that every 3 years, you are having a brand new sales team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You are
Significant
going
churn. Yeah.
exactly now going back to what Ali was speaking about. I'm kind of trying to join the or connect the dots. The cost of hiring is high. Average time for a salesperson to ramp up is 6 months. You have roughly a quarter spent in hiring in terms of time spent in hiring the person. So 3 months to hire him, 6 months to train him. By that time, you have kind of lost 9 months, which goes to your point, Chris. That is cost of lost opportunities because of no bodies. So you're losing revenue worth of 9 months. You are spending 9 months, 6 to 9 months, and getting a body up there that is productive. And in next 2.5 years, that person is going. And that is where I think, Ali, to your point, this cost of $75,000 to $90,000, that is where it comes from, and it is pretty high. So I have got a couple of things that I want to add. Uh, I have been implementing incentive systems for last 17 years. I started my career in this. One of my recent experiences, and this is what happened there. I was working with one of the biggest BFSI clients in India. We had signed up. It was requirements. I was a part of the requirement session. We had traveled on site to their office. We were there for over a week. Now, in one of the conversations, we call it immersion sessions. One of the immersion sessions, I had the talent acquisition and the sales function and the sales com administrator sitting in that meeting, and we started discussing about requirements. Now, without going into the details of requirements, I could see the awkwardness in the conversation when we started speaking about the design stuff in terms of how your plans are and why they kind of structured the way they are. Uh, these are the things that I heard from these people. So, business or sales, what I heard from them is that, and I quote, that people in my organization, my function are leaving much, much sooner than expected. Why? Because of skill set mismatch, low performances. This is a big problem for me. And for that purpose, Sumit, I need a solution that is, for me, highly critical of giving enough visibility and transparency for salespeople. I want them to know more about what they are doing. Now, while this conversation was happening, talent acquisition stepped in stating that, hey, I understand that the attrition is high, but my team has found the best folks. I can't do anything. Like the clarity that I need when I hire a salesperson is something that I do not have. I don't understand why would a salesperson stay back when you are hiring him for selling, but you are incentivizing him on the average talk time on call per client, number of days in office, and penalties if you're working from home. Why do you need these metrics? How can we find someone like this who is willing to basically align with all of these conditions while selling what you want him to sell? Why can't he be anywhere or wherever he wants to be and sell? Then business countered this, stating that that's fine, we are paying him the best compensation in the industry. We are number one amongst the top organizations in the country. And this went on. My conclusion from this is that both the functions were not aligned. I strongly believe both the functions need to be aligned. And that is where I want to get into what are the sources of these problems where we see lack of alignment between talent acquisition and the sales com team. But before I go there, your take on what I just spoke, anything that you would want to add, because this is a comp plan that even I agree is not best set up for the success of a salesperson. I would never want to compensate or incentivize someone on the average time that he spent on the call. Just sell, get me the revenue. I would never want to incentivize someone based on how much time he is spending in the office. Your take
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
Do
If
you agree that there is a lack of alignment between two functions?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good example. You know, at the end of the day, I've said that phrase a lot in this conversation, but it's it's something where, I mean, like a typical conversation would be, we've got an opening for sales. Go find the best person out there, right? We
Hmm.
need a rock star. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, define a rock star. And that's the biggest piece, because
Hmm.
depending on the function, right, depending on the goal of that person, depending on the comp design, depending on the
Hmm.
metrics that we're looking for, like you alluded to,
Hmm.
it is a different type of person. You may have an account manager, right, and we need a rock star account manager. I
Hmm.
think that's a
Hmm.
very different profile from a rock star new business salesperson.
Yeah.
um, and the business, compensation and talent acquisition need to understand what's the goal, what's they're responsible for, how are they impacting the bottom line, and what are the activities they should, be
Hmm.
performing, right, to achieve that.
Hmm.
Um, with the metrics that you mentioned from this particular company, I don't know if they apply to any sales role necessarily, but let's say they do. Um, I wouldn't hear that and think somebody who knocks on doors all day and tries to win new business.
Hmm.
I'd think of that as more of a support type, sales role. Hey, we need you in the
Hmm.
office. We need you on the phone with customers. We need you building relationships, and keeping contracts going, people happy, et cetera. Versus I need you on the road, uncovering, right, really unique opportunities, and trying to get, contracts signed. Um, so, the thought going into what is it we're trying to accomplish should be there, and everybody's moving really fast, which is what makes it hard.
Hmm.
Um, I think too, and maybe going on a bit of a tangent, but it's almost the rigor around training, and that training aligning to what we're trying to achieve and what we expect from each individual. There was a trend, and the trend still continues, where let's just go find people who have the experience, right? We're going to go steal
Hmm.
somebody from our competitor. We're going to go find somebody who's literally been doing this job, because that
Hmm.
way there's less of a ramp up time. There's less need for us to coach them.
Yes.
If they've been successful doing the exact same job, like, they're going to be successful here, which isn't always the case, right? You've got different type of leadership, different culture, different goals.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if that always is the case. And we've lost a bit of the muscle of training, and that training to really align to what we're trying to achieve and make people
Hmm.
feel good about, like, this is what we want you to do, and this is the goal, and this is how you earn ultimately for a salesperson. Um, so, being able to align on what the expectations are, and then know what you need to put in front of that, so that, somebody feels like they're stepping into something where they're going to get the tools that they need to be successful.
Hmm.
Those don't always exist. But if we think about that more and we're a bit deliberate, hopefully we could reduce, either that attrition or just the mismatch up front.
Yes. Yes.
And then being in a room, looking to figure out how can we implement a system, right, that's going to
Hmm.
incentivize and create transparency on how our sales teams are performing.
Hmm.
You know, you wouldn't have a difference of opinion in terms of what good looks like from the
Yes.
business, talent acquisition, and comp. Hopefully,
Mm.
Chris, your take?
Yeah, and I might challenge this a little bit, because it sounds like I think ultimately the talent acquisition perhaps is misaligned to an over-engineered plan
Hmm.
that exists, and that it might not be a fault of talent acquisition
Hmm.
in this case, right? So, like, misalignment might be an overstatement a little bit, because that if you're adding in all of these carrots and sticks into the plan, where you're trying to reinforce behavioral inputs and not focus on outputs of performance, it that by the way don't even necessarily translate into better performance outcomes, by the way, right? That's the
Hmm.
thing, right? You kind of run the risk of, like, running everyone off, candidly. People want autonomy, let's call it self-direction, in
Hmm.
the jobs they have, and
Hmm.
sales is one of those that has even more of a drive. The type of person that generally is drawn to a sales function is someone who is more willing to take more risks, generally speaking. And so you're trying to encourage that conceptually, but in practice, certainly in the everyday management, you're trying to squash that at the same time. And so you're not doing yourself any favor by this sort of structure of sales incentive, candidly. Now, if that's the way that, let's say, this industry is, that everybody does this is like what it is, and maybe to Ali's point, it's more of an account manager than it is an outbound sales function, really, then perhaps what it is there is that misalignment, like you said, like that maybe there is, where we're pulling in the wrong people, because we need people who are more interested in the following the rules that corporate has set forth, and only staying within this lane. I do tend to think that those are generally two different types of people.
Got it. So speaking of, now that we agree that there is some sort of misalignment, I spent some time to identify what can be the root cause, what are the problem sources, and please feel free to add to the list.
Yep.
So the problem sources that I found out are, and this also comes from my experience working with both the functions, something that I also found online. First is conflicting priorities. Talent acquisition is trying to hire fast. Sales comp is focused on hiring the perfect fit that aligns with the corporate strategy. The next one is, because of this, the job roles may not necessarily be clearly laid out. So, what the sales comp wants and what he or she is basically putting together as the job role may not necessarily translate or transpire the way sales comp wants for the talent acquisition or from the talent acquisition. So, lack of clarity in job roles, complex sales comp plans is one thing that I have seen coming up, and geographic disparities. Given that we have opened doors in last half a decade, now organizations are absolutely fine to hire from elsewhere. Now, the job description is put together by a person, or even the compensation is put together by a person who's sitting out of the headquarter in a specific country, and he or she is trying to hire someone to fit that bill but operate out of some other country without considering the cultural gaps. These are few things that I have found out. Anything else that you may want to add to this? And first, do you agree with this list?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good list. I think that there's probably two pieces to this, and one may be internal, and the other one may be external. And like we've talked about, there's the problems from a lack of partnership individually, like, between sales, like sales comp and talent acquisition, to get the job right, and sort of like make sure we're in sync with the job design and the strategy internally. But then there's also the, how do we show up externally, and is it congruent, so that you don't have this, hey, we were in agreement for what we were doing, and then when we showed up to pull in the candidates, we were talking a completely different message. We were sharing something wildly different. So I feel like there's kind of two tracks in this kind of communication and alignment part. And I think that's where, because I think like Ali and his team, well, Ali may sit in a meeting and talk to leadership and say, yep, I understand. And then the team may go and say, well, hey, we're hearing something wildly different, but we know we want these people. Or the manager said, figure out a way to bring this person. But then there's that, like, but we're telling them this, and the leader's telling them this, but they're not the same thing, And so we kind of have that sort of like conflict that may sit on the inside or the outside.
Yeah. Which in one way, sorry, Ali, go ahead.
Well, the other thing, and I mentioned earlier, I would add the training, component as well, or the lack of, let's say. And not that, I think a lot of organizations have sales training functions. I don't think they have absolutely nothing, but like, what is it set up to do, in terms of getting people set up for success? So, the geographic disparity is a really interesting one, because you're right. There's maybe more of a global footprint than people can
Yes.
support, from afar than they did in the past. Somebody's region, let's say, as a salesperson, they've expanded quite a bit. And I think back to some of my own experiences. There was a time where, yeah, I was, let's say, dedicated to some geographies where I wasn't as familiar with the culture and, business approach, language. I'm a pretty upbeat, open, transparent kind of guy. And, depending on the culture of that country and kind of way of doing business, my openness and just kind of friendliness can put people off. And then I can also misinterpret cues, whether it's a buying signal or like not a buying signal.
Yes.
I won't refer to specific countries because I'll probably make somebody angry. But let's say one country, just kind of their way of doing things is maybe happy to say yes, 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 and then nothing happens. Because and you didn't catch the cue of they're just nodding and saying yes, but you're not going to get a contract signed.
Exactly.
And then I think there's other places where, yeah, it might be much harder, let's say, to get that initial call or to actually have a conversation where you can present, the services that you provide. And, but at the end of the day, the yes would mean a yes, so you can have more of a definitive understanding of what you're pursuing and where you're spending your time. And I think, that should be a deliberate training that's given. Hey, you're going to support these countries. Like, how familiar are you with these countries, these geographies, these types of customers? Somewhat. Okay, well, where are the gaps? Let's get you some training around that so that you can be successful. There's things that you're going to stumble along, with just because you have to learn on your own, but that would be really helpful. As well as the complex sales plans. Like, I think LabCorp in certain places has complex sales plans because they've got such a portfolio of offerings, and like the way you earn money, let's say, is different depending on the product, depending on the service line, depending on the other components you bring together. It's okay if you have a complex sales plan, and might even be and it might even be okay that the recruiter can't articulate every component of it, but it should be transparent. Hey, listen, the sales plan's a bit complicated. Here's kind of your total earning ability. You're going to get X amount of training up front, or here's the things that they'll have you focus on, and you'll know exactly what that's going to mean to you. And over time, right, like you'll get up to speed on kind of everything that you need to know. But from a baseline standpoint, here's some of the stats around people that are in the job that are successful. Here's the average, let's say commissions, average amount of employees hitting quota. I think if you're able to articulate some of the things around that, even if it's a complex sales plan, you giving that assurance and some of those statistics and then the confidence that they're going to get the training they need, would help quite a bit. So I agree with all your problem sources. And then even though I do think training hasn't been as robust and for various reasons, right? Cost, just kind of lack of rigor around it. But that would be a piece in my mind that would add to this list as well.
So I want to now move to the solutions bit. But before I go there, I want to summarize the problems and what it leads to in terms of cost of misalignment. So here is the core reason, or here are the problem sources that are leading to misalignment between talent acquisition and sales comp, followed by the cost of misalignment. What is the end result? So what we have seen and what we have just spoken about is that the problem sources are typically conflicting priorities between talent acquisition and sales comp. The job roles are not clear. Sales plans or sales comp plans may at times be complex, and geographic disparities. All of these sources lead to limited collaboration between talent acquisition and sales comp function, which leads to a huge cost of misalignment. And what is that cost? It is basically going back to what we started with, $75,000 to $90,000 of hiring cost, roughly 6 months of ramp up time for a salesperson, which is preceded by 3 months of hiring time, and 34% turnover, which is 1 out of every 3 individuals leaving the organization. Technically, you getting a brand new sales team every 3 years. This is humongous. This is huge. I want to now move to solutions, which is the last part of our conversation. So, how do we get both the functions aligned better? I have a couple of points, but this time around, I would want the two of you to start, and then I can add a couple of points from mine. So, how can we get the talent acquisition function and the sales comp function to come together What are the creative things that you think these guys should be doing to get rid of the cost of misalignment that we spoke about?
Go ahead,
Who wants to go
Chris.
first?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can go.
Yeah.
I can go.
Yeah.
I think it really does start with a regular review of the alignment of the sales jobs to the strategy of the organization. So one thing that kind of comes through from time to time is people have a sentiment, especially folks that aren't that close to it, that it's a set it and forget it sort of thing. Like, hey, we decided on the comp plans. Now we can kind of just let them ride for years. And the problem with that is you have changes in strategy, and candidly, the smaller the company, the more quickly that strategy changes. And if you have multiple portfolios under a larger company, each one of those are cycling at different speeds. And you have to resolve the strategy and actually have decisions on it, right? Then you need to have the jobs that can go and support the strategy. Then you need to have the incentives that
Yes.
align to the jobs that support the optimal execution of the strategy. And so when one of those essentially is off cycle with the other, then you'll have natural conflicts, and they can grow exponentially depending on how long they've let themselves sort of continue to bake without any attention. And so I think there's definitely it's no fault to sales comp and talent acquisition if the business hasn't resolved those other things first. And ideally, what we're trying to do is make sure we're asking the question, prompting the business to change and update and or at least acknowledge the need for attention on those things so that we can execute effectively. So I'd almost say there's a lot of homework that is needed first, right? Then I think if we can do those things with some regular cadence, so that the reality is nobody's perfect. There is no perfection here. It's constantly changing and constantly evolving over time. So, not trying to throw any shade here at all. It's definitely the reality is it's a constant evolution of change, and we're acting on modifications of all of these things regularly. But I do think that in times of constant change, communication is the thing that is probably needed the most. Acknowledgement and transparency of we're not getting it right. All we're trying to do is do our best. And that's where I think we can overcome a lot of the challenges that were discussed with sales comp and talent acquisition. So I can speak very transparently with like Ali and say, okay, we're not really sure what we're doing yet, right? Like, let's say it's an emerging line of business. We know we need this, this, and this, but he may say, well, what about this and this? And we're like, I'm not sure yet. But can you keep your eyes open for that, like the A and B, while we figure out C and D? Because he's the type of person, and that team is they're pursuing like a funnel of talent regularly. Like talent acquisition acts like a sales team. They're constantly pursuing and keeping relationships warm and like they're expanding their portfolio of contacts regularly. And it's a unique thing where, hey, when we're ready, we can then pull the trigger because you're getting other folks like, warm and ready for us, right? And that's where I think we can definitely be as good as we can. And ideally, he's also doing the same thing with some of those really quality contacts that are saying, well, so we're probably having this thing coming. It's like, and I don't know how freely Ali speaks to some of these folks, but I'm sure the really talented high level salespeople are very open and candid as well in those conversations of, hey, we got something baking. We're not sure about it yet, but let's stay in contact. And that's the same way that a salesperson would be talking to a prospect or client about some new product, right? That may be something of interest in the future. And so I think that there's a lot of parallels to the way that talent acquisition and sales just really work. And I think if we can just act in a very similar way that we would want our sales teams to act, in a very transparent, open, and communicative way, we can do a lot to improve those relationships.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Ali,
And I
yeah,
would, expanding on that, it's deliberate partnership, right? Um, let's say Chris and I can't be in every room together at the same time always, right?
yes,
And so, and then, to his point, yeah, there's sometimes not misalignment, but maybe just lack of maturity around what the business is trying to accomplish so that they can articulate that. And they might be looking for feedback from us. But us, taking the time to meet, maybe we align on like what we need and what we're missing. Makes it easier for us to communicate more effectively. And also I can help, right, fill in the gaps for Chris if he's thinking about, hey, I don't have a ton of market data on this. I would love for you to ask some good people about, these three things, and
mm,
either let's just get data points for what they're doing, or let's
mm,
socialize what we're thinking of doing and see if
mm,
they get excited about it or they hang up on you. And I think that feedback loop is really important. And at least us saying, hey, here's what I've gotten from the business, or here's what I think we still don't have a ton of clarity. As long as we're okay with that, we can at least show up to the market in the right way. And we can show up back to the business in the right way, saying, hey, we went and done some work. Here's the things that I think we're still falling down on, to be able to give you some real sense for what the interest is, right, from the market, and the type of talent you get, and what level, let's say, that talent's going to come in at the rate or the compensation package that we're planning to
yes,
offer. And then the business, can use that, right, to make other decisions in terms of what we're trying to achieve and what the investment might be to do that. And then also just recognizing the need to keep people informed. So again, going back to the fact that we're not always in the room together, like there's a recent example where we've updated some of the job titles for our
mm,
sales organization, and we did it officially, let's say. So meaning I worked with our HR business partner, our leaders. We didn't necessarily change things behind the scenes from a compensation standpoint, so we did not loop that person in, to the job
mm,
title changes and updates and modifications,
mm,
because we didn't change the, let's say the sales incentive plan that was tied to each of those roles based on the
yeah,
grade and job code, but we did change the titles.
titles,
And what I did, just because I happened to think about it, was reach out to that person. Hey, are you aware of this? No. Have you seen these, updated job descriptions? No. And even though, let's say it didn't completely upset their world in terms of how they're, designing their
mm,
plans and what they're going to talk to
mm,
candidates about, I mean, it's a good thing that they know that we now are calling, this particular role X. Whether that's just making sure when they send the sales incentive plan to the new person, it doesn't have some job title that's completely
yeah,
different to what we've hired them for, because that doesn't look good. Or just making sure again, right, that we're kind of keeping that communication. Then I know that person would reciprocate if there was a conversation that I wasn't a part of that impacts, right, what we need to communicate to the market. They would come
mm,
back to me about it and keep me informed. So some of that's simple, but it is harder than it should be, just because we're depending on the size of the company and everybody's
mm.
moving fast. We have competing priorities. You have to be deliberate about it.
So great points. I already have almost all of these. One thing that I did not have was feedback loops. I so agree with you. The more there is a feedback coming from both the sides to each other, it is going to be helping both the functions. One thing I would want to add is, and this is more for external hires, when talent acquisition is chasing people from the market. Something that I was thinking about, that we speak a lot about the importance of job descriptions, which I completely agree with. But job description at the end of the day is a piece of paper for me. What I would prefer if I am out there in the job market, what I would prefer is what I kind of jotted down. So from talent acquisition and sales com standpoint, if I am out there in the market, how would it transpire if the two of you collaborate and come up with a realistic job preview? And how do I define that? A realistic job preview is, as a part of the hiring process, the two of you collaborate and give me some sort of assessment. And what is this assessment? This is basically a real time job like assignment that I would be doing as a part of the process. Uh, Maybe a day in the life video, much more immersive. I can actually see the role that I am signing up for. I'm pretty sure there are people already existing in the organization. So how does that day look like? So I can actually feel it even while I am a part of the recruitment process. I am getting interviewed. I know exactly what I signing up for. And another thing is, if one of you could just take me out for a cup of coffee to break the ice, it would make me
Right.
more comfortable.
Virtual cup. Yeah.
Virtual, yeah, in the setup virtual copy. Yes, exactly. So these are the things that I wanted to add. And to conclude, I believe every candidate should know exactly what he or she is signing up for ahead of joining the organization. The candidate should feel connected to the role that they are signing up for, and they should enjoy every bit of the process. Because at the end of the day, it is not about money. Money talks, but engagement seals the deal for all of us. That is all.